Okay, thanks for inviting me for the interview. I think there is still a lot to be discussed about the elections and the results of the elections, and especially the astonishing aspect of it that Zelensky won as high as he did, and that Poroshenko respectively lost as big as he did. He had the worst result of any presidential candidate in the second round of a presidential election in Ukraine. And as is well known, Zelensky had, of course, the best result in any presidential elections in winning with 73%. So I think that is still something to be explained. And there has been a lot of talk recently in commentaries about Zelensky and why Zelensky won and what Zelensky had done to win. But for me, the biggest surprise in all of this is the loss of Poroshenko and the especially high loss of Poroshenko. And that is, I think, surprising in view of four aspects. First, the Ukrainian economy has been growing the last 3 years, so that is something that would normally be supportive of the incumbent president. The growth has not been particularly high, but higher, for instance, than in Russia at the same time. Also, I think Poroshenko has been altogether an active reformer, or at least there have been lots of reforms during the last 5 years. He has claimed, and I think rightly so, that during the last 5 years there have been more reforms in Ukraine than during the previous 25 years. That is probably correct, and at least on paper, lots of things have changed in Ukraine. New institutions have been created. Important reform laws have been adopted, and even the constitution has been changed. Also, I would say that probably in comparison to the previous four Ukrainian presidents, Poroshenko was perhaps the best president that Ukraine had so far, with the possible exception of Mikhailo Hrushevsky, if you count him in as a president. He has been, in particular in foreign affairs, a successful president. During his presidency, the association agreement with the European Union has been signed and, after some delay, ratified. The visa-free regime, the autocephaly for the Orthodox Church of Ukraine have been achieved. And a number of other foreign political successes have been achieved. And Poroshenko was indeed a rather effective diplomat and foreign political actor. He speaks English well, and he had, for instance, a rather well-established relationship with Angela Merkel towards the end of his term. And this was signified by this last meeting that he had with both with Angela Merkel as well as with the head of the Christian Democratic Union, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, in Berlin, just between the two rounds of the presidential elections. And the fourth factor that sort of is astonishing here, that he lost these elections with such an embarrassing, one could say, result against somebody who could be said to be political nobody with no experience. And that was, of course, a major problem with Zelensky, but nevertheless, Zelensky won these elections with this astonishingly high result. So I think there's really something to be explained here. There is a puzzle, an enigma, I would even say, why Zelensky won with such a high result and Poroshenko lost with such an embarrassing result, respectively. I think the main reason why this has happened was that, in distinction to other observers, for instance, the group of the 1st of December, who thinks that Poroshenko largely fulfilled his mandate that he received in 2014, I think actually the main explanation for Poroshenko losing that high is that he did not fulfill the mandate that he received in 2014, and that he did not resolve the basic contradiction of his whole presidency, namely that an oligarch was elected president of Ukraine after an anti-oligarchic revolution. That was the basic contradiction of his presidency, and he did not sufficiently resolve this contradiction. He did something in the limitation of corruption and of oligarchy, of neo-patrimonialism, or of patronal politics in Ukraine. There's less corruption and less oligarchy in Ukraine today than there was when he became president. But nevertheless, I would say he did not do enough. He did not resolve this basic contradiction of his presidency. He left the system, the old system, more or less intact. It is less rapacious, it is less damaging for Ukraine today, but the old mechanisms are still there. And I think actually the main mistake that he made was already done in the perhaps in the first month of his presidency in June 2014, when he did not insist on the adoption of a new electoral law for the parliament. And I think there was a window of opportunity to push through such an electoral law in this post-revolutionary situation in summer 2014. That meant that the new Rada that was elected in October 2014 was elected according to rules of a law that was adopted during the presidency of Viktor Yanukovych. And by this very election, I think, in a way, already the mandate of Poroshenko's presidency was violated, and it meant in practical terms that, again, positions on party lists in the proportional part of the elections were sold for plain money. And in the single member district elections part of the 2014 parliamentary elections, again, the candidates had the opportunity to basically buy the electorates in the single member districts with the so-called SETI, or the nets, the networks, where you can basically just hand out money to handlers who would then secure for you the seat in parliament. And this was then just maybe the most significant symptom of the basic problem that Poroshenko had. And all this happened against the background that he did not fulfill maybe the most important promise that he made in 2014, mainly to secure peace for Ukraine. I think that was an unreasonable promise anyway, because Poroshenko and no Ukrainian president could deliver really peace. But he was basically elected, I think, that at least was the idea, I suppose, of many people who then voted for him, that he, as an experienced diplomat, economist, former minister under Yushchenko and under Yanukovych, a co-founder, in fact, of the Party of Regions, that he would have the experience, the necessary experience to resolve the conflict with Russia, that he would find a way to negotiate with Putin and to secure peace and stability on Ukraine's eastern border. He did not deliver that. He could, I think, not deliver that. And he apologized for that, I think rightly so. But he basically violated then the deal that he, as an oligarch, would become president with an understanding that he would deliver peace for Ukraine, and that he would, as an oligarch, especially fight oligarchy in Ukraine. And he did neither. I think he could not deliver peace, and he did not deliver sufficient resistance and sufficient limitation of the oligarchic system in Ukraine, and that's why I think he lost the elections. I think there were three other factors that increased his problems in the pre-election period. The second factor, I think, that was to the disadvantage of Poroshenko is that he led his cultural policies in education, in memory affairs, in historical politics, in language politics to be dominated by Galician politicians and intellectuals. In a way, one could flip or one could say that Poroshenko conducted an electoral campaign for the presidency of Galicia, and he won the presidency of Galicia. There he gained indeed an advantage. He also was influenced by the Ukrainian diaspora, and he won in the Ukrainian diaspora, but obviously his policies and his campaign were ill-designed for the rest of Ukraine. That's why he lost even in Volhynia and in central Ukraine. The third factor that I think played a crucial role for his loss in the elections was that because of the repercussions of the deep economic crisis and of the war against Russia, the context of the Ukrainian oligarchy and of Ukrainian corruption had changed in principle in the last 5 years, meaning that the popular, so to say, the tolerance for corrupt practices has been sinking rapidly, not only because of the Euromaidan, but because of the many other problems that Ukraine has since 2014. The corrupt practices that were tolerated before the Euromaidan, before the start of war with Russia, and before the annexation of Crimea, and before the economic crisis of 2014-2015, those practices that were tolerated before that are not any longer tolerated in Ukraine, and one could say that there was a certain race between the sinking popular tolerance for corruption in Ukraine and the anti-corruption policies that Poroshenko was implementing. I would admit that, but Poroshenko obviously lost this race. The limitation of corruption was not sufficient for the lowering tolerance for corruption in the Ukrainian public. And the fourth and final factor, I think, that led to his astonishing loss in these elections was that Poroshenko relied in his campaign and in the strategy for his re-election, as he probably wanted to achieve, on political technology, on practices and mechanisms and instruments developed in the post-Soviet space in the 1990s. The most vivid expression, but by far not only such instrument that he applied, was the candidacy of Yuri Tymoshenko. Obviously designed, Yuri Volodymyrovich Tymoshenko, obviously designed to take votes away from Yulia Volodymyrovna Tymoshenko. But there were many other such little tricks and violations of electoral practices. There was apparently even ballot stuffing and plain falsification in the Donetsk Oblast. At least the results in the Donetsk electoral districts look very unusual, very suspicious, because he had in the first round and in the second round, in some of the electoral districts there and in some of the precincts, he had too much support that can be only explained with falsification. And there were many other such tricks that I would cover with the term political technology. And this political technology was effective against Tymoshenko, but it was ineffective against Zelensky, because political technology is basically about manipulation, about emotions, about images, about dramaturgy. This is all very well described in Andrew Wilson's seminal monograph, Virtual Politics, Faking Democracy in the Post-Soviet World. And the paradoxical situation that here emerged in Ukraine in early 2019 was that these political technologists that Poroshenko had hired wanted to conduct a post-Soviet electoral campaign against people from show business. And these people from show business, they knew, of course, much better than these political technologists how to conduct a campaign that would center on images, on emotions, on dramaturgy, on tricks, and so on. They knew this business that these political technologists were trying to get into much better. That was their business, show business. And I think they were pretty happy about this political technology, because thereby Poroshenko entered their field. He did not change his policies sufficiently. He did not make the campaign about substance, about issues, about contents. He tried to make the campaign about images, about emotions. For instance, through his campaign poster, where he was sort of putting himself against Putin, and that was, of course, something that may have worked against Tymoshenko and other competitors in the sort of traditional political sphere, but was something totally unsuitable for an enemy who was coming out of show business and knew this sort of campaigning much better than Poroshenko knew. And that's why he lost with such an embarrassing result in the second round. And I would say these four factors: the non-fulfillment of his mandate, his Galician cultural policies, the changing context of corruption in Ukraine in times of war and economic crisis and social crisis, and the inapt application of political technology for his electoral campaign were the reasons for his damaging loss. The really odd thing about all of this was that it was already pretty clear about a year ago that Poroshenko would have enormous problems to be re-elected. I wrote an article already then for the Harvard International Review where I said he wouldn't be re-elected, and his only chance to be re-elected was to change his policies and the substance of his presidency. He chose not to change the substance of his presidency, but he made this campaign about images, about emotions, about culture, about religion, about language, and so on. And that was then the reason that he lost with such a high margin.